Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. For quite a while on this channel we have been exploring the fantastic world of beat-em-ups, which has obviously included looking at the forever awesome Streets of Rage series. In fact, apart from just discussing the 4 official entries in the series, we have even looked at a couple of fan games, including the ridiculously polished Streets of Rage remake, a game that combined and built on the original trilogy, resulting in one of the greatest fan-made titles in all of gaming history. While Streets of Rage Remake is certainly the most famous of the fan games, today we are going to look at a quirkier take on Sega's Streets of Rage franchise, when we look at Streets of Rage Zombies, an insane horror slasher themed fan project that combines various horror movie tropes and cameos with the Streets of Rage universe. This game is truly ridiculous, so therefore I felt it would be well worth highlighting today. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the mad story of Streets of Rage Zombies, a game you have to see to believe. Yeah! As discussed on this channel many times before, by the time the late 90s came around, 2D side-scrolling beat-em-ups had practically gone extinct, with new games in the genre rarely seeing release. Despite this did not mean there was not still a huge install base for this style of games, who the mainstream simply were not catering for. By the mid-2000s, a bedroom development community began to flourish, who would begin to plug this gap, eventually leading to the release of openbor, the open source continuation of the fan-made Beats of Rage engine, which would make creating beat-em-ups easier than ever before. One of these amazing projects created in openbor was of course the very subject of today's video, Streets of Rage Zombies. The game was made by Alexej Alexandrov, who is not to be confused with the Belarusian chess grandmaster of the same name. The man who posts on forums under the pseudonym of Sumai would produce the crazy game that sees Blaze Fielden and company facing off against hordes of zombies and all sorts of other familiar frightening foe. So rather than prevaricating around the bush any further, let's dig straight in and see what was included in this unique piece of gaming media. Rather spookily, the game's plot reflects a similar state of affairs to what is actually going on in the world today. The city has been infected with a dreadful disease, creating a problem far worse than any crime wave. The disease has led to a zombie outbreak, and to make things worse for our heroes, Skate has disappeared. So the Streets of Rage fighters head to the epicenter of the zombie pandemic to try and find him. Once gameplay commences, players find themselves in a post-apocalyptic park full of smashed up cars and other dystopian symbolism that represents the fall of the city. It instantly becomes clear what this game is about when you begin to take on enemy sprites, who mostly appear to be zombified versions of sprites from classic Streets of Rage games, giving the whole title a sort of night slashers appeal. The Data East slasher themed beat 'em up, which we may take a deep dive look at on this channel down the line. Taking out these putrid foes leaves their rotting carcasses on the ground below, even accompanied by swarms of flies to ramp up this sometimes sickening experience. Control-wise, rather than simply relying on the mechanics of old, Streets of Rage Zombies actually brings things up a notch by featuring faster, more fluid combat, the likes of which was first featured in Streets of Rage 2X, another Streets of Rage fan game we may consider spotlighting at some point in the future. Big impressive moves can be executed when players' super meters are filled up, and you may notice at points you can even set the enemy sprites on fire with sprite animations taken straight from many Capcom favourites, such as Street Fighter 2. These elements combined with the speed leads to a particularly flashy affair. In this fan entry, players have a choice between controlling Axel, Adam, Blaze, Max or even Shiva, presenting a nice little selection of memorable fighters. As the first stage progresses, players make their way through the park section, then slowly descend into the sewers. The same eerie gameplay themes continue as more literally butchered classic enemy sprites continue to emerge. At the end of the stage you take on a zombified Fatty Boom Boom to close off the section. The game is littered with horror, slasher movie and horror video game references throughout, some of which I am likely to miss due to my lack of knowledge in such an area of expertise. But I would be keen to have you all point out any I miss down in the comment section, so at times we may need to work together, yeah. Stage 2 sees players raging through the streets, particularly pandemic-torn streets I may add, which are far more damaged than any within the canon Streets of Rage games. There are definitely lots of sprites here that do not appear to be necessarily have been adapted from the Streets of Rage series. However, we continue to get new ones that certainly were, such as these zombies on motorcycles for example, which I must say look particularly awesome. Being a beat 'em up, it would have been poor taste to create this game without including a lift section, so in order to maintain beat 'em up integrity, we of course have a classic lift part of the stage to play through. This descends down to a boiler room like area, where meat hooks hang aplenty, accompanied by a plethora of enemies inspired by the Hellraiser franchise, of all bloody things. And when I say bloody things, I mean that quite literally. There are bloody things everywhere. Players then move on to the classic factory style setting found within the original trilogy. Stage design here, everything looks pretty traditional, except obviously the battlefield is laced with zombies, so not much to add here really. The section comes to an end with a fight against a really messed up looking version of Barben from Streets of Rage 2, who has various objects inserted inside him, and not even in a sexy way. It is of note that often before or after boss encounters we sometimes get stills giving us an up close look at these gruesome enemies, adding an extra layer of detail to the overall gaming experience. Next up, players find themselves in a modified dojo stage with buzzsaws and other obstacles in the way to cause blood spilling damage as fighters make progress. The short section ends against zombie versions of the juggling bosses from a previous game. Moving on, the game includes a familiar industrial setting, which this time is on fire, which makes me want to try and make a clever Streets of Fire reference. However, sadly, I cannot think of one. Eventually, gameplay moves to aboard a train, a sort of ghost train if you will, which makes you feel more like you are playing a Final Fight game than necessarily Streets of Rage, but it is very cool indeed. The boss of the train section is a hockey mask wearing maniac, offering another callback to a familiar franchise. Action progresses to atop the train where our heroes continue to mow down horde after horde of freaking zombies. The game advances to a modified version of the underground section from Streets of Rage 3, paired with new obstacles such as spears that shoot out the ground to impale the player. Great joy can be found from smashing zombies to pieces with a baseball bat, but personally I think this game would have been a little more genre appropriate if they switched the baseball bat out for a cricket bat, a weapon that is usually more popular within zombie apocalypses. The next area looks great, and Tony the Tiger would be proud of the city backdrop accompanying the portside, giving the area a sort of Final Fight-like appeal. It's all more zombie decapitating action really, although players do get to take on zombie clones of Axel. More classic lift sections return from the originals along the rooftop brawling part of the stage 2. The stage rounds off with a boss fight against a zombie version of the wrestling opponent from the old games. After the fight, the cutscene shows a bloodied Axel exclaiming that somebody is screaming for help, leading to a fight atop another rooftop, looking for the owner of the voice. Here the fighters find a man who is screaming for help. Axel demands to know who he is, with the man exclaiming, "He forced me to do it, and he is at the dock, and about to poison the water." Players are then presented with a branching choice of whether or not to take the doctor for his word. Selecting believing him of course brings the fighters straight to the port, leading to further action taking place. Here, more zombie hordes must of course need to continue to be taken down as players brawl through this area inspired by the opening stage from Streets of Rage 3. Players then take yet another lift as they once again descend deep underground. The lift takes players to an underground warehouse-like area full of spinning blades and enemies wielding sickles, who are looking to dismember our playable characters. Down here, players discover none other than Mr. X, the classic villain featured within the original Streets of Rage trilogy. He states that drugs, weapons, rackets and prostitution are all trifles to him now, and instead claims to be controlling the world with a zombie apocalypse. Axel soon demands to know where Skate is, before a battle commences against the small fighter who is in a zombified state. This fight against both Zombie Skate and Shiva sees Mr. X patiently watching on, just like in the closing fights within Streets of Rage 2. Winning the fight against Shiva and Skate sees Mr. X tell the player, "I'll kill you, then bring you back to life, then I'll kill you and bring you back to life again," in an endless cycle. Here a fight then takes place against the typical gun-wielding maniac who is Mr. X, but defeating him he awakens as a zombie to be taken on once more. After a long fight against this man, in his final form another cutscene then plays, where Axel states they rescued the city from zombies, prevented the infection, but the young Skate was unfortunately killed. As noted earlier though, the game has split paths, so what happens if you choose to not believe the Doctor? Let's find out. Players fight through a different stage, including getting to battle against a zombie version of Ash. At the end of this area, players find an unharmed Skate being guarded by Shiva, who too must be defeated. After successfully rescuing Skate, players then wade through a water-filled sewer area before playing through more stages, including more rehashes from the original trilogy. A notable moment happens on the boat stage though, when players take part in a huge boss fight against Nemesis from Resident Evil 3. By the way, do you know what Nemesis means? A righteous infliction of retribution manifested by an appropriate agent, personified in this case by an horrible funt. Me. Defeating Nemesis is the second way to finish this game, with a cutscene displaying that the team managed to rescue Skate, but Mr. X has poisoned the water, turning everyone in the city into zombies. Still though, there is a funny quip where Max mentions that it is now his job to bring mankind back to life, and since Blaze is the only female human left, he knows what they have to do, leaving this ending of the game finishing off with Blaze looking in shock. Now that brings the main campaign to an end, but like many fan games, Streets of Rage Zombies would continue to receive updates, which would include 3 shorter gameplay modes expanding on this title further. The first of these modes is called Corrupted Cops, which sees our cast fighting the police. These officers, however, seem to spontaneously combust when defeated, suggesting some sort of shenanigans going on here. This relatively short gameplay section features some great backdrops and nicely mixes things up from what most of the game has on offer. The next of these DLC style modes is called Craniac, with much of the action being based on Hellraiser, and some great backdrops including a breakdown yard. The section also contains a fight against Pennywise, but the magnum opus of this mode is when players discover a lone television set, where to players' delight and horror they get to face off against the bloody woman from The Ring. Cool, eh? Finally, we have Pop mode. I'll be honest, I never had a freaking clue what was meant to be going on amongst all of this sort of wackiness, but apparently the whole mode is a nod to another fan game, and the greedy priests, seductive nuns, and Ash's own gang wearing the BDSM outfits are all nods to a game known as Streets of Rage Russia. So let me know if you want a video on that game too. So from all of this, I guess you can now tell that this fan game is packed to the brim with content. More in fact than what can be found in any of the standalone Streets of Rage Mega Drive games. But aside from this game being pretty large, what is most impressive about this game is the amount of effort and detail that has gone into remaining faithful to the overall horror slasher theme. In the main gameplay mode, all enemy sprites have been edited appropriately, and the fact that the main game features 2 endings, with them both being bad, really drums home the approach the developers were going for. Like many horror films, Streets of Rage Zombies has no good ending, and our characters are left suffering no matter which two of the choices they go for. All in all, Streets of Rage Zombies is a fantastic love letter to the Streets of Rage franchise and the horror slasher genres, marrying up elements of these as perfectly as what could possibly be achieved in my opinion, resulting in an experience that is rather special. Personally, I was very impressed with this one, and I would recommend others to dive in and try this out. It's a great little concept executed very well. The game is easy to find and easy to download online too. Before we round off today, just thought I'd let you know that my wife has uploaded a few new videos to her channel this week too, including a video covering 5 celebrity sickos who appeared in video games. So if you want to watch those, either search and subscribe to Lady Decade, or click the link I have in my pinned comment attached to this video. Yeah! Apart from that though, this, ladies and gentlemen, was the story of Streets of Rage Zombies, a crazy game that really does exist. Make sure you like, subscribe and hit that notification bell to ensure that you do not miss any of my upcoming retro content, as I am sure to cover more fan games like this down the line. I am fortunate enough to work full time on YouTube, in part thanks to the people who back the channel on Patreon. If you want access to my Patreon only bonus catalogue of videos, which is getting rather large, why not consider backing the channel on Patreon? In regards to these people, massive thank yous go out to Sebastian Velez, Carl Johnson, The Murder of Crows, Heyo, Paulo Lopez, Joseph Rasmick, Ben Harradine, Corey Imar Sr., Capcom vs SNK, BXL Gotham, Rowan Dinched, Evan Border, Philip Mampf, Aswell Rarakai, Keith Ferguson, Joaquin Varela, Michael Cullix, Ego, Jordan Durant, Angel Light 85, Nick Daniels, Princess Zana, Glennie Glenn, Daniel Daly, Computer Man, House of a Ted, Gary Pinkett, ECU Professor, Kid Anime, Justin Wang, Aaron McNamara, Hermes Gonzalez, Instant Gratification Monkey, Man Shovel, James Bishop, JB, Michael Hall, Wesley Sang-hee, Wayne Kerr, Langston Miller, Noob, Brian Barry, Sarah Powell, Flaming Renee, Marvin Liga, Chris Cool, TOG Driver, Adrian Hannington, Bernard NG, Richard Stu Stewart, James McDonald, Dan Van Dammit, Lewis Viant, John Bates, David Bow, Chris Fisk, Mike Bruno, Rick67, Antonio Rodriguez, Craig Jenkins, RetroVersion.com, Casey Wright, Synth Spaces, Zai, Andrew Bazansky, Gunther Hendricks, and everybody else who supports the channel. I love you long time. Thank you very much. Cheerio.